Right, today we're going to be looking at using curves within Photoshop. We're going to use those primarily on adjustment layers. Now, if you're not familiar with curves, the best way to describe them is they're very much like levels. They are used for controlling the contrast, the light, the dark, the colors within an image. Best way is really just to show you now. I'm going to start off by calling up the curves. Now, there's several ways you can do this. You can either go to Image, Adjustments, and click on Curves there, or you could use Control M, method that I'd certainly recommend. But today I'm going to use an adjustment layer. So if I go to the bottom of my layer palette and click there on the adjustment layer, there we see curves. Incidentally, if you're worrying that my version of Photoshop is very old, which it is on this computer, don't worry, this hasn't changed much in recent versions of Photoshop. There is a histogram now in later versions, but the principle still works the same. Just to quickly show you what we have on, well, within this dialog box, within the curves dialog box, we have a drop down with the composite RGB. This is a red, green and blue image, an RGB image, and each individual channel. On later versions you've got the ability to select custom settings for your curves, but effectively all they're doing is just playing around with this line. It's just different shapes effectively that you can apply to your image. Right, now if I just put this over here, making sure preview's on, I'm just going to give you a quick demo of what we can achieve with curves. You can see if I pull that up there, lightens the image, and this darkens the image. And if I was to go through individual channels, you can see this affects the light and the dark in a very similar way to the way levels work. I can also get rid of these points. Whenever I click on the curve here, I can create these points. I can get rid of them just by clicking and dragging away from the dialog box. Right, I'll give you one example of what you can do with curves. Let's say, for instance, looking at this image, it's very pale in the lighter ends of the tonal range, but quite dark in the darker end of the tonal range. This is obviously where the darker information is. As you can see on the tonal range bars here, you can see where you're sitting with each tone. So the darker end is this end, the lighter end is up here. If I was just to anchor these darker points and then just move the lighter points, you can see that the darker points have stayed put. So unlike levels, which allow you to change the color and the contrast and the light and the dark across the entire tonal range, curves allow you to customize the tonal range. So you could say, right, I want everything in the light end to become darker or lighter or change its color. Everything in the darker end stay put, or vice versa. You can pretty much customize this curve to how you want. You can reduce contrast, for instance, by boosting up the dark and lowering the light, and of course increasing contrast. You can do it this way. It's pretty much, you can do pretty much anything with curves. You can, for instance, cut out absolute white from the image by bringing these points in, and maybe I'd want to lighten the image a little bit, or cut out the dark. Oops, wrong way. Cut out the dark, or increase the point where the black starts. Now, what I'm going to do with this image is I'm just going to tweak the blue within the image. Quite often in natural photography or even studio photography like this image, light areas tend to be a little on the blue side and dark areas tend to be a little on the red side. Now if I was to boost up the blue in the image like that and then bring it down a little in the dark areas just by anchoring it, by creating these individual points. If I went to the red, I would do the opposite. So I'd anchor along these points and then boost the dark areas a little. if I click on that, we can see the before and after by clicking on the hide and show to that layer. It's a very slight improvement. These really are very small tweaks, and you find that curves are especially useful for such things. Just getting the colours right within your image. Again, you can do this with a selection. Within the selection, if you're applying curves using the conventional method of image, adjustment, and curves, or Control N, or you can do it as part of an adjustment layer. The great thing about an adjustment layer, if you haven't encountered them yet, is that you can mask out the effects of what you've just applied using the paintbrush black or white to revert. Right, so curves, don't be afraid of them. They're very, very good for small tweaks, especially. You could use them for just about anything to do with colour and contrast, but they're especially useful for just tweaking those colours. If your dark areas are the wrong colour, you can go into your channel, bring up those dark areas without having to select them using any of the selection tools. So curves are very useful for getting full control over the information within your tonal range.